Thor crashes into Westeros and somehow starts changing hearts faster than he changes battles. And what if the most dangerous thing he brings to King's Landing isn't lightning, but truth? Watch out for how Daenerys Targaryen, Tywin Lannister, and even the dragons start seeing the world differently because one man refuses to play by its rules. Before we start, what do you look forward to seeing Thor do right the most in Westeros? This episode 3. Come on, let's step into it.
Tywin Lannister had built his life on a single principle. Not wealth, though he had that. Not military capability, though he had that too. Not the political architecture of alliances and obligations and the careful distribution of Lannister gold into the specific places where gold produced the most reliable loyalty. Though he had all of that as well, meticulously constructed over 50 years, the most comprehensive power base in the history of Westeros. The principle was simpler than any of those things. Legacy. Not legacy in the abstract sense that people invoked when they wanted to sound profound at funerals. Legacy in the specific practical sense of a man who had decided early that the measure of a life was what it produced after it ended. That the purpose of everything he was doing, the gold, the armies, the alliances, the marriages, the careful placement of Lannister children in positions of maximum influence, was to build something that would continue without him. Something that would make the name Lannister mean something specific and permanent and unassailable long after Tywin himself was in the ground. This was the organizing principle of his existence. He had not questioned it. He had not had occasion to question it. And then a god had arrived in his city and asked him in a small council chamber with witnesses what he had built that would continue without him. And the answer that had arrived, the honest answer, the one he had not spoken because the question deserved sitting with rather than responding to immediately, was not the answer he had expected to find when he looked. The dynasty, yes. The gold, yes. The alliances, yes. But those were structures. What would continue? What would exist because Tywin Lannister had existed and would not have existed otherwise? He was still working on the answer. This was, for a man who had answers to everything, the most uncomfortable experience of his recent memory. And the discomfort was not making him angry. It was making him think, which was, he was beginning to suspect, exactly what Thor had intended. Which was, he was further beginning to suspect, what made Thor more dangerous than anyone who had arrived in King's Landing since Aegon the Conqueror. Aegon had arrived with dragons. Thor had arrived with questions. The dragons had been more immediately threatening. The questions were going to matter more. Tywin sent for Thor at dawn, not through a servant, through a direct written request, his own hand, delivered by his own secretary, which communicated clearly that this was not a summons and not a command, but something that Tywin Lannister almost never deployed in his dealings with anyone. A request. Thor arrived at the Tower of the Hand as the morning light was finding its way through the narrow windows of King's Landing's upper districts. The specific quality of early light in a city of close-packed buildings, light that had to navigate around obstacles rather than arriving directly, finding the angles and using them, which produced an illumination that was partial and tactical and in its way more interesting than the direct version. Tywin was at his desk, not performing at his desk, actually working. Documents spread before him with the organized purposefulness of someone who treated administration as a form of warfare and brought the same systematic attention to both. He did not look up when Thor entered. Thor sat. He waited with the specific quality he brought to waiting. Not impatience and not performance of patience, but the genuine stillness of someone who was using the time rather than enduring it, running whatever internal processes required, running while the external situation developed at its own pace. Tywin finished what he was reading, set it down, looked at Thor. "The question you asked me," Tywin said, without preamble, without the social architecture that most conversations began with. "What have I built that will continue without me?" "Yes," Thor said. "I have been thinking about it since last night," Tywin said. "I know," Thor said. Tywin looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because you are the kind of man who thinks," Thor said, "thoroughly, continuously. The question went in last night, and you are a different person this morning than you were last night, and the difference is what thinking produces in someone who does it honestly." He paused. "The difference is visible." "What difference do you see?" Tywin said. "You sent me a request," Thor said. "Not a summons, not a command, a request." He paused. "In 50 years of building power, you have not had many occasions to make requests. You have made them when strategic necessity required the acknowledgement of another's authority, not when you wanted a conversation." He paused. "This morning you wanted a conversation." Tywin was quiet. "Sit where you like," he said, repeating Thor's words from the day before with the specific quality of someone returning something that had been given to them, testing its weight in their own hands. Thor acknowledged this with a slight nod. "What did you find," Thor said, "when you thought about the question?" Tywin looked at his desk, at the documents spread across it. At 50 years of administration compressed into parchment and ink and the specific ordered categories of someone who had converted the management of power into a science. "I found," he said carefully, "that what I have built is structures, systems, frameworks of obligation and resource distribution that will continue to function after I am gone because they have been designed to function independent of any single participant." He paused. "The Lannister gold continues whether I am alive to direct it or not. The alliances are maintained by the obligations that created them. The military structures I have built will follow whoever commands them because they have been built to follow command rather than any specific commander." "Yes," Thor said. "But," Tywin said, the word arrived with the specific weight of a man making an admission. "Structures without purpose become self-serving. They continue, yes, but continuing and mattering are different things." He paused. "And what they are continuing toward," another pause, longer. "I find I am less certain than I was." Thor was quiet, let the statement exist without filling the space it created. This was, Tywin noted, an unusual quality in a conversation partner. Most people, when silence arrived in a significant conversation, rushed to fill it with words, additional arguments, qualifications, the rhetorical padding of people who were uncomfortable with what silence might produce. Thor let the silence do its work, the specific patience of someone who understood that some understanding required empty space to arrive in. "My children," Tywin said finally. "Yes," Thor said. Cersei became... He stopped. What she had to become, Thor said, inside the only framework she was given. I gave her that framework, Tywin said. Yes, Thor said. I taught her that love was a liability, Tywin said. That sentiment was weakness. That power was the only reliable currency. He paused. She learned the lessons perfectly. Yes, Thor said. And they are destroying her, Tywin said. Yes, Thor said. The room was very quiet. Jaime, Tywin said. Tell me, Thor said. Jaime was the best of what I wanted to build, Tywin said. The capability without the sentiment, the strength without the softness. He was everything a Lannister should be. He paused, and then he killed a king. To save 500,000 people, Thor said. Tywin looked at him. You know the story, he said. Tyrion told me, Thor said. Eris and the wildfire caches. Jaime had a choice between the oath and the city, and he chose the city. He paused. In Asgard, we would call that the correct choice. In Westeros, Tywin said, we called it Kingslayer and gave him no chance to explain. Yes, Thor said, and he has been carrying that ever since, in silence, without the acknowledgement that the choice deserved. He paused. That is a specific kind of damage. The damage of doing the right thing and receiving the wrong name for it. Tywin was very still. I never asked him, Tywin said quietly, why he did it, what he was thinking. I assumed it was impulsiveness. The Jaime that I raised was capable of impulsiveness. He was also capable of saving 500,000 people, Thor said. Both of those things were true, the impulsiveness and the capacity. He paused. You built something in him that you did not see because you were looking for the other things you built. Tywin looked at his desk, at the documents. Tyrion, he said. The name arrived differently from the other two. Heavier, more complicated. Carrying the weight of something that had not been resolved. That had been carried in a specific configuration for decades and had calcified in that configuration until changing the configuration would require acknowledging that it had been wrong. Your son, Thor said, is the best person in this city. Tyrion is a... Your son, Thor said again, simply, without the addition that Tywin had been about to make. The qualification, the diminishment, the habitual subordination of Tyrion's qualities to the hierarchy of Lannister expectations within which those qualities had always been assessed. Tywin stopped. The word he had been about to say remained unsaid. He is your son, Thor said. He has your intelligence, your strategic capacity, your ability to read situations with a speed and accuracy that most people cannot manage. He paused. He also has something you do not have. Something you could not give him because you did not have it to give. What? Tywin said. Empathy, Thor said. Genuine empathy, not performed empathy, the kind politicians use when they want people to feel heard. The actual capacity to understand what another person is experiencing from inside their experience rather than from outside it. He paused. He knows what it is to be dismissed, to be underestimated, to have the people with the power to see you accurately choose not to, because what they would see would complicate their existing understanding of the world. He paused. He knows this because you taught him, not intentionally. You taught him by doing it to him. The room was completely still. Tywin looked at Thor, at the specific quality of the statement. not an accusation, not a performance of moral judgment, and not the rhetorical structure of someone making an argument. A fact, stated with the flat accuracy of someone delivering something they had observed and were reporting without addition or subtraction. And that empathy, Thor said, is what makes him the most capable person in this city, because he understands the people he is governing from inside their experience. He knows what the small folk of Flea Bottom feel, because he knows what it is to be looked at and found lacking by the people whose opinion determines your opportunities. He paused. You built that in him, accidentally, through neglect and dismissal and the specific cruelty of withholding acknowledgement from someone who had earned it. He paused. It is the best thing you have built. Tywin did not respond. The silence was different from the previous silences in the conversation. Those had been the silences of a man thinking. This was the silence of a man feeling something he had not arranged to feel and did not have the architecture to manage quickly. Thor let it exist. The morning light moved through the Tower of the Hand's windows in its navigating way, finding angles, working around obstacles. "What do you want from me?" Tywin said finally. His voice was the same as it always was, controlled, precise, giving nothing away in tone. But the question itself gave something away. It was the question of someone who was ready to hear the answer rather than calculating the response to the answer they expected. "3 things," Thor said. "Tell me. First, speak to Tyrion. Honestly, not about politics, about what you have not said." He paused. "He does not need your approval. He stopped needing it years ago because needing it was too expensive. But he would benefit from the truth. Most people do." "And the second? Speak to Jaime," Thor said. "Ask him why he killed Eris. Listen to the answer, not the political implications of the answer itself. And the third?" Thor looked at Tywin, at the man who had built more than anyone in Westeros and was discovering that the question of what it was for had not been answered. "Help me," Thor said. "Not with the succession crisis, with what comes after. When the political situation resolves, and it will resolve one way or another, there will be a realm to rebuild, systems to change, the specific patient work of converting structures that serve power into structures that serve people." He paused. "That work requires someone who understands how power operates at the level you understand it. Who knows where the levers are and how they work and what will break if you pull them incorrectly." He paused. "I need someone who can do that. I can provide the strength and the will. I cannot provide 50 years of experience with how power actually functions." Tywin looked at him. "You are asking me," he said slowly, "to help dismantle the system I spent 50 years building." "I am asking you," Thor said, "to help build a better one." He paused. "The system you built will not survive what is coming from the north regardless. Nothing built on the current foundation will survive it. The question is whether something better is ready to replace it when the current one fails. And if I decline, then I build it without you," Thor said. "More slowly, with more mistakes, at higher cost to the people who will live inside whatever gets built." He paused. "I am not threatening you. I am telling you the honest assessment of the situation." Tywin was quiet for a very long time. Outside the window, King's Landing was doing its mourning. The specific sounds of it, the market, the carts, the voices, the specific acoustic signature of 400,000 people doing their ordinary living, drifted through the tower's windows with the consistency of a city that continued regardless of what was happening in its upper rooms. "You said my empathy is the best thing I built," Tywin said. "You meant Tyrion's empathy." "Yes," Thor said, "but it was not something I intended to build," Tywin said. "It was something that happened in spite of what I intended." "Yes," Thor said. "That is not a legacy," Tywin said. "That is an accident." "Lord Tywin," Thor said, "most of the best things are." Tywin looked at him for a very long time. Then he said the thing that he would say to Tyrion 3 days later, and to Jaime a week after that, and that both of them would spend years processing because it was the thing that needed to have been said 30 years ago and had not been, and was being said now, and late was not the same as never. But he did not say it to Thor. He filed it. He put it in the place where the things that needed doing lived in his mind, the organized, systematic, precisely ordered place where Tywin Lannister kept the things he had decided to act on. "I will consider your proposal," he said. "I know," Thor said. "You know I will agree," Tywin said. "I know you will think about it until you are certain," Thor said, "and then you will agree, because the logic is sound, and you are a man who follows sound logic regardless of what it costs him." He paused. "That is the best thing about you, not the power, the logic." Tywin looked at the desk, at the documents, at 50 years of organized administration, at the single question that had not been organized. "The Night King," he said. "Yes," Thor said. "How long do we have?" "Less than a year," Thor said. "Perhaps significantly less. The wall has held for 8,000 years. It is beginning to fail." "How do you know?" "Because," Thor said, "the cold I feel when I look north is not the cold of winter. It is the cold of something that has been pressing against a barrier for a very long time and has found that the barrier is thinning." He paused. "Like water against a dam. The water is patient. The dam is not infinitely strong. And when it fails, then everything south of it becomes the battlefield," Thor said. "Every city, every house, every family, every person who has been spending their energy fighting over a chair while the real war was gathering itself beyond the edge of the world." Tywin looked at him. "A chair," he repeated. "A chair," Thor confirmed. The room was very quiet. Then Tywin did something that Thor had not seen him do. He almost smiled. Not the specific, mirthless expression that passed for a smile in Tywin's political arsenal. The acknowledgement of something well done. The controlled recognition of a successful maneuver. Something smaller and more genuine. The specific expression of a man who has spent 50 years taking things very seriously and has just encountered the view from a sufficient distance to see how some of those things look. "My daughter," he said, "tried to have you arrested." "Yes," Thor said. "The King's Guard captain told her it would require a battalion," Tywin said. "Approximately," Thor said, "and destroy half the Red Keep." "That was his assessment," Thor said. "I think he was being conservative." The room was quiet. Then Tywin said, "You may use my offices when needed. My staff will provide you with whatever administrative resources the situation requires." He paused. Discreetly. "Thank you," Thor said. "Do not thank me," Tywin said. I am not doing it as a gift. I am doing it because the logic is sound, and wasting resources on an inferior approach when a superior one is available is something I have never been able to justify. I know, Thor said. The thank you stands regardless. He stood, moved toward the door. Thor Odinson, Tywin said. Thor stopped. The small folk, Tywin said. In Flea Bottom, the woman waiting for news of her husband. Thor turned. Her name is Mira Crab, he said. Her husband is Joan. He was on the Lady Luck. I know, Tywin said. I had my staff locate the surviving crew manifest this morning. A pause. Is he alive? Thor said. Yes, Tywin said. He is at the city's eastern healing houses. Injured. Expected to recover. He paused. I thought you might want to know. Thor looked at him, at the most powerful lord in Westeros, who had spent the morning reviewing survivor manifests from the Battle of Blackwater for a woman in Flea Bottom whose name he had found out because Thor had mentioned her. I will tell her, Thor said. Yes, Tywin said. Do that. He turned back to his desk, to his documents, to the organized work of 50 years. Thor left. In the corridor outside, he stopped, stood for a moment, thought about what had just happened, about the most feared lord in Westeros spending his morning on a survivor manifest for a woman who would never know his name, about the specific human being that lived somewhere under 50 years of Tywin Lannister, about the cost of building structures so thoroughly that the builder became indistinguishable from the structures, about what it required to become visible again. He walked toward Flea Bottom. He had news to deliver. Mira Crab was at her door when Thor arrived. Not because she had been told he was coming. She had not been told. She had been at her door because she had spent 3 days at her door, or at the window when the door became too direct an expression of the hoping, cycling between the two positions with the specific restlessness of someone whose waiting had run out of things to do with itself. She looked at Thor, at the armor, at the face of the thing that had commanded lightning over the bay 3 nights ago. Is he dead? She said, directly, without preamble. The specific question of someone who had been building toward it for 3 days and had decided that whatever the answer was, the not knowing was worse. He is alive, Thor said. He is at the eastern healing houses, injured, expected to recover. Mira Crab looked at him, and for a long moment, then she sat down on her doorstep, not with collapse, with the specific release of tension that had been structural, the careful relaxation of something that had been holding very hard for a very long time and had been given permission to stop. The Eastern Healing Houses, she said. Yes, Thor said. I can arrange transport if you need it. I know where they are, she said. She stood, looked at the child on her hip, who had been present for this entire exchange with the specific equanimity of a very young child for whom the emotional register of adults was interesting but not alarming. How do you know? She said. How did you find out? Someone reviewed the survivor manifests this morning, Thor said. Who? Thor considered. Someone who thought it mattered, he said. That is the important part. She looked at him, at the answer that was not quite an answer, at the face of something that had come to her door in Flea Bottom to tell her that her husband was alive. You came yourself, she said. You could have sent a servant. Yes, Thor said. Why didn't you? Thor looked at her. At the woman who had told him 3 days ago that her husband was named Joan Crab, and he had been on the Lady Luck, and she did not know yet, and she was not going to build on maybe. "Because," he said, "you deserve to hear it from someone who was here when I thought it might go differently." She was quiet. Then she shifted the child on her hip, looked at Thor one more time with the specific expression of someone completing an assessment they had started and had now sufficient information to finish. And said, "Thank you." 2 words, carrying the full weight of 3 days of waiting and the specific gravity of relief that was also grief. Grief for the 3 days, for what they had cost, for the specific texture of not knowing, which was its own category of suffering. "Go," Thor said. "He is waiting." She went. Thor watched her go. At the corner of the street, she turned back once, briefly, the child looking over her shoulder at him with wide eyes. Then she was gone. Thor stood in the street for a moment, in the specific, ordinary chaos of Flea Bottom doing its mourning around him. He thought about Tywin Lannister reviewing Survivor manifests at dawn, about the best things that were built accidentally, about the distance between what a person was and what a person performed, about how sometimes, when no one was watching, the distance closed. He walked back toward the Red Keep. He had a great deal to do. The news arrived mid-morning from a raven that came from the Arbor, a trading post on the southwestern coast that had excellent long-range visibility and a relay system maintained by a merchant consortium whose investment in early shipping intelligence had incidentally produced one of the best early warning networks in Westeros. The Raven said 3 things. The first thing was that a fleet had been spotted in the Redwine Straits. The second thing was that the fleet was large. Estimates varied between the message and the corroborating messages from 2 additional relay points. But the consistent figure was significant. Not 3 ships, not a raid, a fleet. The third thing was that the fleet was accompanied by 3 dragons. Tyrion read the Raven. Read it again, set it down, picked it up. "Thor," he said. Thor was across the small council chamber reviewing the northern maps with Jon and Robb, who had spent the morning doing what Starks apparently did when given access to comprehensive intelligence about the North. Treating it like a problem to be solved rather than a catastrophe to be managed, which was the specific Stark quality that Thor had been finding increasingly useful. "She's coming," Tyrion said unnecessarily. "I know," Thor said. "You know? I felt it this morning," Thor said. "When I was in Flea Bottom. A change in the fabric of things, the specific quality of something significant moving toward a significant location." He paused. "She will be here in 2 days. Possibly less. The dragons make the fleet faster than standard." Tyrion looked at the Raven. "At the 3 dragons mentioned in it." "3 dragons," he said. "Yes," Thor said. "Arriving to claim the Iron Throne," Tyrion said, "which you have announced is being decided through a trial of worthiness." "Yes," Thor said. "Which you destroyed," Tyrion said. Thor was quiet for a moment. "I destroyed the chair," he said. "The throne is a concept. The concept has not been destroyed. The concept requires the correct person to embody it." He paused. "That is the conversation I need to have with Daenerys Targaryen." "She has 3 dragons," Robb said from the maps. "Not with hostility, with the flat assessment of a military commander identifying relevant variables." "Yes," Thor said. She will not be easily told she cannot have what she came for, Robb said. She is not going to be told she cannot have what she came for, Thor said. She is going to be offered something better. He paused. The conversation is going to require honesty, complete honesty, about what I am and what I intend and what the realm needs and why the thing she has been building toward her entire life is real, but the version of it she has been imagining is incomplete. How do you know the version she's imagining is incomplete? Jon said. Thor looked at him. Because everyone's version of what they are building toward is incomplete, he said, including mine, including yours. He paused. That is not a failing. It is the specific limitation of imagining something you have not yet experienced. The imagination fills in the gaps with what it knows. The gaps can only be filled correctly by the experience itself. He paused. Daenerys has imagined ruling Westeros. She has not experienced it. And the imagination and the experience will diverge in ways she has not yet discovered. And you're going to tell her that, Tyrion said. Yes, Thor said. She might not receive it well, Tyrion said. No, Thor agreed. She has 3 dragons, Tyrion said again. Tyrion, Thor said pleasantly. I am aware of the dragons. I am mentioning them repeatedly, Tyrion said, because they seem like the kind of variable that benefits from continuous acknowledgement. I appreciate the thoroughness, Thor said. The dragons will not be a problem. How can you be certain? Because, Thor said, I have encountered beings considerably more dangerous than dragons, and survived the encounters through the specific combination of genuine respect for what they are and absolute clarity about what I am. He paused. Dragons respond to both. They are exceptional judges of character. They have to be. They have been alive long enough to develop the assessment. Tyrion stared at him. You've met dragons before, he said. On other worlds, Thor said. Different forms, the same essential nature. He paused. We will be fine. I want it noted, Tyrion said, that I am recording my concern for the historical record. Noted, Thor said. Specifically the part where 3 dragons are involved. Also noted, Thor said. He found Varys in the corridor outside the council chamber 30 minutes later. Varys had the expression, the I know something that changes everything expression, but it was different from the previous times Thor had seen it. More personal, less strategic. The expression of someone delivering information they have a relationship with rather than information they are deploying. She sent a message, Varys said, ahead of the fleet, a private message, to me. What does it say? Thor said. Varys produced a small piece of parchment, handed it to Thor. The handwriting was not what he had expected, not the formal script of someone performing queenly authority. Direct, slightly uneven. The handwriting of someone who wrote what they meant and did not revise. Lord Varys, I have heard about the man from the sky. I have heard about the trial and the throne and the question of worthiness. I am coming not because I was invited, but because Westeros is mine by right and by something older than right, by the specific need of it, which I can feel across the narrow sea in the way that people feel things they are connected to at a level that cannot be articulated. I am not afraid of him. I want you to tell him that, not as a threat, as information. I am also, a pause in the handwriting, a small correction visible. I am also told he told the truth to Stannis and Cersei and Tyrion and everyone he has spoken to. I am told he does not perform honesty, that he simply is honest. I want you to tell him that I have been waiting my entire life for someone to do that to me. Not at me, to me. The difference matters. I will be there in 2 days. Tell him I want to talk before anything else happens. Just talk. No dragons, no armies, no political theater. Just talk. Thor read it, read it again, looked at the last line. Just talk. He thought about what Varys had told him. About a girl who wanted to trust and had been disappointed so many times that the wanting was buried. About genuine honesty being the thing she had been waiting for and had given up expecting. He handed the letter back to Varys. "Tell her," he said, "yes." "That is the entire response?" Varys said. "Yes," Thor said. She expects yes or no," Thor said. "She said just talk." I said yes. That is the conversation she asked for, and the answer she asked for, and any addition to it is the performance she specifically said she did not want. He paused. "Yes." Varys looked at the letter, at the single word response, at Thor. "She is going to find you very interesting," Varys said. "Good," Thor said. "I find her very interesting." He paused. Interesting people are the only ones worth the conversation. He walked on. Varys stood in the corridor, looked at the letter, at the one-word response he was going to transmit, at the specific improbability of what was happening in this city. He had spent 30 years managing information. He had never managed a situation quite like this one. He found to his surprise that he was not trying to manage it. He was watching it, like something he had not expected to get to see. Yes.
Wow, why did Daenerys Targaryen say yes that quickly? Not to a throne, not to power, to patience. That tells me something. Deep down, she never truly wanted a crown. She wanted meaning. And that's what this story quietly reveals. Daenerys isn't being conquered, manipulated, or outmatched. She's being understood, maybe for the first time in her life. But now, the real question is, when power finally comes back within reach, will she still choose wisdom over fire? Let's see.
He said quietly to the empty corridor, reading the word one more time. Then he went to send the message. The dragons arrived before the fleet. This was not surprising. Dragons flew faster than ships sailed, and Daenerys' 3 had been riding the thermals above the fleet since the narrow sea crossing, their wing beats carrying them ahead of the sails with the ease of things that had been built for exactly this kind of distance. King's Landing saw them first as shapes against the morning sky. 3 shapes, wheeling. The specific motion of large flying things in thermal currents, not the linear motion of arrows or bolts, but the exploratory circling of creatures that were assessing what was below them. The city went quiet. Not the silence of a city in shock, the silence of a city in awe, which was a different quality. Shock produced a specific kind of stillness, the stillness of people whose processing had been interrupted. Awe produced a different stillness, the stillness of people whose processing had been completed and had arrived at the specific conclusion that what they were seeing exceeded their frameworks, and they were choosing to simply see it rather than immediately categorize it. 400,000 people looked up. Thor stood on the walls. He had been standing there since before dawn, not waiting exactly, more the quality of someone who had decided to be present when a significant thing happened, rather than finding out about it afterward. He watched the 3 shapes resolve from distant specks into the specific reality of what they were. Dragons. Not the dragons of Westerosi stories, the contained, bounded, symbolically manageable creatures of tapestries and family sigils, and the carefully curated mythology of a civilization that had used dragon symbolism long after the actual dragons were gone. The real version. The specific physical reality of creatures that had been built, not evolved, built by the same forces that built everything that was genuinely extraordinary, at a scale that made the mythological version look like a thumbnail sketch. The largest one was red and black. It circled the city once. Then it looked at Thor. Thor looked back. The specific mutual assessment of two things that were each accustomed to being the most significant presence in any given space, encountering each other. Thor did not move, did not reach for Mjolnir, did not change his posture or his expression. He simply looked. The dragon, Drogon. Thor knew from Varys' intelligence, the largest and the most bonded to Daenerys, held its position in the air above the wall and looked at the figure standing on it. For a long moment, then it dropped lower. Not a dive, a considered descent, the specific movement of something making a choice rather than executing a program. It dropped until it was approximately 20 meters above the wall and hovered there with the effortful grace of something very large, maintaining a position that did not come naturally. At 20 meters, its eyes were remarkable, not the flat reptilian yellow of popular imagination. Complex, carrying something in them that was not thought in the human sense, but was the specific intelligence of a creature that had been alive long enough to develop the capacity for genuine assessment. It was assessing Thor. Thor stood and allowed the assessment. "Hello," he said, not loudly, not performing calm. Simply speaking to something that was present and deserved acknowledgement. Drogon made a sound, not the roar of a dragon performing threat, something lower, more complex, the specific vocalization of a creature that was not threatened and was communicating this. "I know," Thor said, "she is coming." Another sound. "Yes," Thor said, "I know what you are." He paused, "And you know what I am." Drogon looked at him for another long moment. Then, with the unhurried deliberateness of something that had made a decision and was executing it, he turned and flew back toward the sea, toward the fleet. Tyrion, then who had appeared on the wall at some point during this exchange with a cup of wine and the expression of someone who was not going to pretend he had not been alarmed, said, "Did you just have a conversation with the dragon?" "Yes," Thor said. "What did you talk about?" "He was establishing whether I was a threat to her," Thor said. "I communicated that I was not. By standing very still and talking quietly." "Yes." "That worked." "Yes." Tyrion looked at the retreating shape of Drogon, at the other two dragons circling farther out. "I want you to know," he said, "that the number of things that work on you is genuinely alarming from a political management perspective." "I appreciate your concern," Thor said. "I am cataloging it for my memoirs," Tyrion said. "The chapter will be titled, 'Things I Did Not Expect to Work That Worked.'" "How long will the chapter be?" Thor said. "At current rate," Tyrion said, "considerable." Daenerys Targaryen came ashore at the port of King's Landing in the early afternoon, not with the full ceremony that her arrival technically warranted. The Unsullied and the Dothraki and the formal procession of a queen claiming her capital. She had agreed to Thor's yes, and he had agreed to her just talk, and she was honoring the agreement with the specific literalness of someone who meant what they said and expected the same in return. She came with Missandei, who served as translator for everything that was not common tongue, and Tyrion, who met her at the dock because Tyrion meeting people at docks was apparently becoming a pattern in his life. And the specific quality of someone who had spent years building toward a moment and was in the moment now and was discovering that the moment felt different from how she had imagined. More immediate, less symbolic, more real. She was younger than Thor had expected. Not physically, he had been briefed, he knew her age. Younger in the way that people were younger when the distance between their lived experience and their chronological age was vast in both directions simultaneously. Old in what she had seen, young in how she was carrying it. The specific combination of someone who had compressed a significant amount of living into a small number of years and had not yet had the time to fully process the compression. She was also, and this was what the intelligence had not captured, what Varys's careful description had approximated but not achieved, completely present, not performing presence, present. The quality of someone who is entirely in the current moment rather than in the next moment or the previous moment or the politically constructed version of the moment. She looked at Thor with eyes that were the purple of Valyrian heritage and were at this moment carrying the specific quality of someone who had been told a significant amount and was in the process of reconciling the told thing with the present reality. "Thor Odinson," she said. "Daenerys Targaryen," he said. They looked at each other. "You destroyed the Iron Throne," she said. "Yes," he said. "I came to sit on it." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "Are you going to tell me I was wrong to come?" "No," he said. "You were right to come. This is your realm and it needs you." He paused. "I am going to tell you something more complicated than whether you were right to come." "Then tell me," she said. Not with challenge, with the specific openness of someone who had written just talk and had meant it completely. "Walk with me," Thor said. They walked, not toward the Red Keep, not along the formal processional routes that a queen's arrival would typically follow. Through the city itself, the streets, the districts, the specific physical reality of the place that Daenerys had been imagining and building toward and approaching across an ocean for years. Thor walked beside her and let the city be the beginning of the conversation. He did not need to point things out. She was looking, with the specific attention of someone who had governed cities and had learned, through the governing and the failing and the starting again, that you could not govern what you did not see. She looked at Flea Bottom the way she had looked at the streets of Slaver's Bay, with the full weight of someone for whom poverty was not an abstraction. She stopped at a corner. A child was sitting in a doorway eating something that was barely food with the focused earnestness of someone for whom it was sufficient because it was what there was. She looked at the child, at the street, at the buildings. "This is the capital," she said. "Yes," Thor said. "After 3 centuries of Targaryen rule," she said, "and then the Baratheons." "Yes," Thor said. "This is what we built," she said. Not with shame, with the flat acknowledgement of someone receiving information about the consequences of a dynasty they have been fighting to restore. "This is what the system built," Thor said. The system that every ruler maintained, because maintaining the system was how you stayed a ruler. He paused. That is the wheel you said you wanted to break. Yes, she said. Tell me what you meant when you said it, Thor said. She told him. She told him about the cities of Essos, about Astapor and Yunkai and Myrene, about the specific architecture of slavery and what it did to people and what removing it required and why removing it was not the same as replacing it with something better and why she had struggled with the difference between those two things. She told him about the dragons and what commanding them required. Not just power, genuine relationship, the specific kind of trust that was earned rather than assumed. She told him about her advisors and the ones who had served her well and the ones who had served themselves and the difficulty of telling the difference until it was too late. She told him about the wheel. It is not just slavery, she said. It is the pattern where some people have power by accident of birth, and other people serve that power by accident of birth, and the pattern reproduces itself endlessly because everyone inside it is too busy surviving it to change it. She paused. That is what I want to break. Not just Lannister power or Baratheon power, the pattern itself. Yes, Thor said, that is the correct diagnosis. She looked at him. But, she said. But, Thor said, breaking the pattern requires understanding it more completely than any single person can understand it from their own position. You understand what it does to the people at the bottom. That is essential. It is more than most rulers have ever understood. He paused. What you understand less well, not because you are unintelligent, because you have not had the specific experience, is what replacing the pattern requires in terms of the specific slow patient work of building systems that sustain justice after the liberator leaves. The cities, she said. Yes, Thor said, you freed them. You did not, could not, build the systems that would have kept them free in a form that survived your departure. He paused. That is not a failing of your character. It is a gap in your specific experience. He paused. A gap that can be filled. She looked at him. You are telling me I am not ready, she said. I am telling you, Thor said, that you are the most promising candidate I have encountered for what this realm needs. And that promising is not the same as ready, and that the difference between those two things can be closed. He paused. I am also telling you that I believe you know this, at some level. In the specific knowledge that people carry about themselves that is more accurate than the knowledge they present publicly. She was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? She said. Because, Thor said, you wrote Just Talk. You could have arrived with all 3 dragons and the Unsullied and the specific theater of a queen claiming her capital. You had the capability for it. He paused. You chose talk. He paused. That is the choice of someone who understands that the theater and the reality are different things and has decided in this specific moment that the reality matters more. She looked at him, at the specific quality of being seen accurately, at the experience of encountering something she had written in her letter, not performed honesty, but the actual thing. What are you offering me? She said. Time, Thor said. The specific time to learn what ruling requires before the weight of ruling makes the learning impossible. Advisors who will tell you the truth rather than what serves them. The chance to govern and make mistakes and correct them in conditions that are less catastrophic than inheriting a realm in the middle of a war and an existential threat from the north simultaneously. He paused. And eventually, when you have had the time and the experience, the throne. Not because I am giving it to you, because you will have earned it. She looked at the street, at the child in the doorway who had finished eating and was now watching them with the wide-eyed attention of someone too young for political calculation and too old for indifference. And if I say no, she said, if I say the throne is mine by right and by heritage and by the dragons behind me, and I am taking it now. Then, Thor said, we will have a much longer and more expensive conversation. He paused. But I do not think you will say that. Why not? Thor looked at her. Because, he said, you looked at that child for 30 seconds. Not as a symbol, not as evidence in an argument about inequality, as a child. He paused. People who look at children as children do not make decisions that cost children their safety for the sake of political positioning. He paused. That is who you are. That is the person the throne needs. He paused. Give yourself the time to become the full version of it. She was quiet for a very long time. The street moved around them. King's Landing doing its afternoon. The child in the doorway eventually went inside. You destroyed the Iron Throne, she said again, but differently from before, not as an accusation, as something she was completing the processing of. Yes, he said, what is the realm ruled by if there is no throne? The people who deserve to rule it, Thor said. Identified through demonstrated capability rather than blood. He paused. Guided, for now, by someone with the specific combination of power and indifference to power that makes the guidance honest rather than self-serving. You, she said. Until the people who should rule it are ready, he said. She looked at him. Are you worthy? She said. It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question, the specific question of someone who took worthiness seriously and was applying the standard consistently. Thor was quiet for a moment. I do not know, he said. She looked at him. That, she said slowly, is the most honest answer to that question I have ever heard. Yes, Thor said, most people who claim to be worthy are performing worthiness, Thor said. I know, he paused. I am trying not to perform it. I am trying to do the work that worthiness requires and let the work speak for itself. He paused. That is all anyone can do. She was quiet. Then she said the thing she would say later to Missandei when Missandei asked her what Thor was like. She said it quietly, to the street, to the city, to the child who had gone the city, to the child who had gone inside. He is exactly what I stopped believing existed. Thor heard it, did not respond, let it exist in the space it deserved. They stood in the street of King's Landing for another moment. Then she looked at him. Yes, she said, one word, the same word he had sent her. Yes, he said back. They walked back toward the Red Keep, toward the work. The meeting between Daenerys and Tyrion happened in Thor's presence, because both of them had asked for it independently and separately and at different times and for different reasons, which Thor found interesting in the specific way that parallel independent requests for the same thing were interesting. They suggested the thing being requested was genuinely necessary rather than strategically convenient. Tyrion asked because he had served Daenerys before, in a different version of events. In the history that was not this history. The history where Thor had not arrived, and the succession crisis had ground forward through its terrible logic toward its terrible conclusions. Tyrion had found his way to Daenerys and had served her and had believed in her and had watched her begin to become something that the realm could not survive. He did not have that history, but he had the intelligence of someone who had read everything available about her and had spent enough time with Thor to develop, by proximity, a specific sensitivity to the gap between who people were and who they were becoming. He was afraid of what she might become. He was also, and this was the thing he was less comfortable admitting, hopeful about what she might become if the becoming happened correctly. "My lady," he said. "Lord Tyrion," she said. They looked at each other across the small council table, at the specific weight of two people who had arrived at this moment from directions that had not previously intersected and were now in this room intersecting. "I served the Mad King's family," Tyrion said. "My father killed your family's soldiers. My sister was queen in the city you came to reclaim." He paused. "I want to say something about all of that." "Say it," she said. "None of it is your fault and none of it is mine," Tyrion said. "We were both born into a story that was already in progress. The specific catastrophes of our family's relationship to each other were created by people who are mostly dead and are entirely not us." He paused. "I am telling you this not to exonerate either of us from our own actions, which are separate from our inheritances and entirely our responsibility, but to establish that the starting point of this conversation does not have to be the weight of everything that came before it." She looked at him. "You speak very carefully," she said. "Yes," Tyrion said. "I have found that in situations of high consequence, careful speaking is the difference between saying the thing you mean and saying the thing you will spend years regretting." He paused. "I am trying to say the thing I mean." "What do you mean?" she said. "I mean," Tyrion said, "that I want to help you. Not as a political ally. I have had those, and they have been of variable reliability. Not as a subject. I have been one of those, and it has had its complications." He paused. "As someone who has been studying the problem of how to govern this realm well for 20 years and has a great deal of relevant information and a genuine interest in the outcome that is not primarily self-serving." She looked at him for a long time. "Thor says you are the most capable person in this city," she said. "Thor says accurate things," Tyrion said. "It is one of his more reliable qualities." Something moved in her expression, not quite a smile. The specific, not quite smile of someone encountering something they had not expected to find pleasant and finding it pleasant anyway. "He also says," she said, "that the best thing your father built was you, and that he built you accidentally." Tyrion was very still. "He said that?" "Yes," she said. Tyrion was quiet for a moment. "I will need to think about that for a while," he said. "Yes," she said. "I imagine you will." Thor, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table in the manner of a large presence that had decided to be a background variable rather than a central one, said, "The North." They both looked at him. "When you are ready," he said. "There is something more important than the succession crisis that requires both of your attention." He spread the northern map on the table. Daenerys looked at it, at the wall, at the space beyond it. "The Night King," she said. "Yes," Thor said. "I have heard," she said slowly, "from beyond the narrow sea, stories, reports from sailors who have spoken to Night's Watch Rangers." She paused. "I did not know how seriously to take them." "Take them entirely seriously," Thor said. "Take them more seriously than the throne, more seriously than the succession, more seriously than anything we have discussed in the last 3 days." He paused. "The dragons." "What about them?" she said, with the specific sharpness of someone whose primary relationship in the world was being referenced. "They are the single most powerful military asset available for the coming conflict," Thor said. "Dragonfire and lightning are both heat-based. Heat disrupts the Night King's magic." He paused. "I need you to understand that this is what the dragons are for. Not conquest, not throne claiming. This." He gestured at the map, at the wall, at the space beyond it. "They were alive when the last long night happened. They carry the memory of it in their blood." Daenerys stared at him. "The last long night," she said, 8,000 years ago. "The eggs that became your dragons were stone for a century," Thor said. "Stone for a century because the magic that kept them dormant was waiting for the specific conditions that would make their hatching relevant." He paused. "You walked into a fire. They hatched. Consider, what were the conditions?" She was very still. "The magic was returning," she said slowly. Because what wakes magic on this world," Thor said, "is the approach of the thing that magic was built to oppose." He paused. "The dragons did not hatch because of you specifically. They hatched because the long night is coming and this world's defenses are waking in response." Another pause. "You are the person who carries them. That matters enormously, but understanding why they came back clarifies what they are for." She looked at the map, at Drogon and Rhaegal and Viserion wheeling somewhere above the city, visible through the chamber's high window as 3 distant shapes. At the specific weight of understanding that the thing you have been treating as your weapon and your symbol and your birthright is also a responsibility of a different kind entirely. "They are not mine," she said quietly. "Not entirely." "They chose you," Thor said. "That is different from belonging to you, and more significant." He paused. "Things that choose you have assessed you. The assessment was favorable. What you do with the assessment is the ongoing work." She looked at the map for a long time. Then she looked at Tyrion, at the man who had offered to help her become what the realm needed, at the map, at the wall, at the coming dark. "Then we have work to do," she said. "Not as a queen declaring an agenda, as a person who has understood the situation and has decided to be equal to it." "Yes," Thor said. "Where do we begin?" "With everything we know," Thor said, "assembled together. Jon Snow's first-hand account, the Night's Watch ravens, the Stark family knowledge, everything Tyrion has been cataloging, everything you have learned from your dragons about the nature of what they were made to oppose." He paused. "Full picture, all of it, then we plan." He looked at the three of them. Daenerys, who had been building toward a throne and had found something more important than a throne. Tyrion, who had been trying to govern well inside a system designed to punish good governance, and had found someone who wanted to change the system. Jon Snow, who had been beyond the wall and come back with the truth in his hands and nowhere to put it, and had found people finally willing to hold it. 3 people in a room, with a map and a problem, and the specific quality of genuine shared purpose that was rarer than any other resource in any realm Thor had ever visited. "Begin," he said, and they began. 3 days after Daenerys Targaryen arrived in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister did the thing he had been filing in the place where the things that needed doing lived. He sent for Tyrion, not through a servant. He went himself to Tyrion's chambers and knocked on the door, which in 50 years of their relationship had not happened before. Tyrion opened the door, looked at his father, at the man who had never knocked, at the face of Tywin Lannister doing something for the first time. "May I come in?" Tywin said. Tyrion stepped back. Tywin entered. They sat. And Tywin said the things that should have been said 30 years ago. Not all of them. Not in the first conversation. There were too many, and the first conversation was the beginning rather than the whole, and beginnings required the specific care of things that would collapse if weighted too heavily too soon. But some of them, the true ones, the ones that had been waiting in the organized place in Tywin's mind and had been moved to the front by a question asked in a small council chamber by a god who had spent 1,500 years asking the right questions at the right times. Tyrion listened. He did not respond immediately. He sat with what he heard the way he had learned to sit with significant things, long enough for the initial reaction to pass and the second reaction to arrive, which was usually more accurate than the first. Then he said to his father, in the quiet voice he used when he was saying the thing he actually meant rather than the thing that served the situation, "I needed to hear that 20 years ago." "I know," Tywin said. "You should have said it 20 years ago." "I know," Tywin said. A pause. "Why didn't you?" Tywin looked at his hands, at the hands that had built the most powerful house in Westeros. "Because," he said slowly, "I was afraid that what I felt when I looked at you was weakness, and I had spent my entire life ensuring that weakness could not be found in me." He paused. "I was wrong." Tyrion stared at him. "About which part?" he said. "Both," Tywin said. "What I felt was not weakness. And even if it had been, even if love for your children is a weakness, it is the specific weakness that a man should choose." He paused. "Thor told me the best thing I built was you, built accidentally." He paused. "I am telling you that the accident was the best thing I have done." The room was very quiet. Outside, King's Landing was doing what it did in the evenings, winding down, the specific deceleration of a city moving toward night, the sounds of it changing from the busy texture of activity to the quieter texture of rest. Tyrion looked at his father, at the man he had spent his life trying to earn something from, at what it looked like when the something finally arrived, at the specific complexity of arriving things, the relief and the grief simultaneously, the relief that it came and the grief that it came late, both true and neither canceling the other. "Thank you," Tyrion said finally. "Not for the words, for the knocking on the door. That same evening, in the small council chamber, Thor sat alone with the northern map. Robb and Jon had gone to the Godswood, the Godswood being the specific place that Stark brothers apparently went when they needed to say things to each other that did not belong in council chambers. Daenerys was with her dragons, which was where she went when she needed to think in the way that only the dragon's presence facilitated. Tyrion was with his father. Varys was somewhere. Varys was always somewhere. Thor sat with the map, at the wall, at what was beyond it. He had been feeling it more strongly in the last 3 days, the specific cold pressure of the Night King's advance, not fast but consistent, the way glaciers moved, the way anything moved when it had decided that the destination was inevitable and time was not a constraint. Or he thought about what needed to happen. The trial by worthiness, still coming, still necessary, the political architecture that would give whatever came after the succession crisis a form that the realm's lords could work within. Robb Stark's situation, the phrase, the Boltons, the specific unraveling of Northern support that needed to be addressed before it addressed itself in the way that things unraveled in Westeros. Stannis, still out there, still convinced of his destiny, still with Melisandre and the Lord of Light and the specific rigid righteousness that made him both formidable and dangerous. The Wall, the Wildlings, Mance Rayder, the Night King himself. All of it arranged in the specific order of necessity, not preference, necessity. The logic of what had to happen before what could happen. He looked at the map, at the space beyond the wall, at everything that was coming from that space toward everything that was in this room and in this city and in this realm and on this world. He thought about 1,500 years, about the worlds he had fought for and the things he had fought against, and what surviving all of it had taught him. He thought about the things worth protecting, about the woman in Flea Bottom whose husband was recovering in the Eastern healing houses, about the girl selling flowers, about Robb Stark in the Godswood telling his brother things he had not been able to say in any other place, about Tyrion and his father and the door that had finally been knocked on, about Daenerys standing in a flea-bottom street looking at a child eating insufficient food and carrying the weight of it correctly, and about Jon Snow with the specific expression of someone who had been beyond the wall and come back and had found, finally, someone willing to believe what he had seen. About what all of it amounted to. He looked at the map. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow, north, beyond the wall, Mance Rayder. The truth about what was coming delivered to the people who needed it most in the form that would reach them most completely. And after that, the convergence of everything that had been building since Blackwater Bay. All of it arriving at the same place from different directions. The Night King pressing south, Thor pressing north. The specific collision of a god who refused to stop and a death that had decided to advance. He gripped Mjolnir. The hammer resonated. "I know," he said. He looked at the map one more time, at the wall, at the space beyond it, at everything that lived between here and there that was worth the fighting for. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow we go north.
Bro, Tywin Lannister knocking on Tyrion Lannister's door hit hard. Thor speaking to Drogon like two ancient forces recognizing each other was cold. And Daenerys choosing purpose over pride? Didn't see that coming, but it felt right. Be real with me. Which moment grabbed you the hardest, and what caught you completely off guard? Also, drop your own crossover title in the comments, plus a short backstory. Looking forward to episode 4.